And are we really surprised? All this time saying prayers on volcanoes. We have no shortage of fires. It's the way we were raised. In the fault lines and frays, the smoke of our shores, peering through obsidian and coal, meeting now and then with different nays, and on at least our second chances. All the ones who ever liked home. A long gone king. A longer gone Hui. One and the other, the gift and the threat that lingers between them like ink streaming under the city.
So welcome to part 2 of this interview with Scottish poet and playwright Rebecca Sharp. If you missed part 1, you can find a link for it in the show notes of this video, along with links for tickets to Rebecca's upcoming events. So we're going to start the second half off with Rebecca showing us some slides and things and talking about the project from her point of view. So I'll just hand it over to you.
Great, thank you. Yes, so I've got some research images, which I will bring up here. So this first image is the beautiful artwork made for the project by Frances Law. So we have the 3 figures, Maiden, Mother, Mage. And I can't say a lot of technical detail about how she made them, but I do remember lots of layering. She works a lot with collage. She's a printmaker. So she was layering up lots of different materials and textures to get this idea of someone that isn't clear to us, you know, someone that we're sort of seeing through the mist of time, this kind of idea. But on the left, the green shape, we pick the colours to represent the different stages of life. So green is kind of spring and sort of youth. So that's for Maiden. And you'll see sort of in the middle of the body shape, a sort of dark shape, which is Triprane, you may recognise. So again, this idea of the landscape in the body, and the body being the landscape. Thane is one with the land. So we all are, really. So it's about sort of repairing that kind of nature connection. The middle is orange, is her colour. That's for Mother. So it's this alchemical, vibrant, creative power. We've got this swirling shape in the middle of the body, which is almost like a rose, really. So that kind of connects with ancient, maybe sort of Mary-like imagery of the rose, sacred feminine, these kinds of things. It's also the swirling estuary that Mother, emerges from, you know, the Firth of Forth. So it's swirling waters. A lot of the text in the Mother section of the performance has very alchemical imagery, and also very sort of Arthurian language. So we're starting to kind of hear the layers of mythology in Mother. And we have sort of fish shapes at the bottom of her feet there to allude to the fact that she emerged from the waters in this kind of alchemical rebirth. And then the Mage figure on the right, we chose purple for mystical power and elderhood. And she's the kind of least visible of them all, really, because she's of all time. By the time we get to Mage, she transcends time, you know. And we've got the full moon there, perhaps, and maybe the lines across the bottom or the River Clyde, who knows. But it's this kind of very elemental connections for the characters. Just gorgeous, yeah. So this artwork that Frances Law has created accompanies the project everywhere. So it'll be on everything. It'll be on the book. She was creating it for use throughout the whole project. This, I won't attempt to explain this, but I just love it, right? So this is made by the wonderful composer and musician Alex South, who created this image, and this is his visual score for the production. One of our central images for all of us really has been this Triskel, or sometimes slightly different, in a slightly different shape. It's known as the triquetra, I think, but this is the Triskel, sort of 3 swirls which can be drawn in one uninterrupted line. So these are the 3 sections. Again, you can sort of see the colour coding that's going on. And Alex has devised this amazingly intricate system of interlocking musical motifs and cycles to get us from one section to the other. Each of the 3 sections has its own identifying musical motif, and there's also sounded scoring that takes us between the sections as well. So yeah, I just love visual scores. They're just visually so gorgeous, but I couldn't tell you what's going on here musically. You'll just have to come to the show to see. But this is the genius of Alex South. These are images made by Mull Monastery. So these are the icons. I actually have them both right here in my writing room with me as sort of totems for the project. But these are the existing images that we had for Thane, very contemporary icons that have been made. So you can see sort of telling the story, she's in her coracle. So the image on the left, that's possibly Traprain in the background, sort of looming in the darkness. She's just been flung off. She's in the coracle, she's pregnant, and she's yet to arrive at Kouros. Quite dark. I think the darker images is darker in every sense. But I actually borrowed a bit of this imagery in the text. So in the image on the left especially, although it's also in the right, she's sort of looking up and the sky is kind of drooping down, almost in sympathy, I thought. And I just was really drawn to that part of the image. And it's alluded to in the text, this idea of, I think she says, the sky bent low to meet me where I grew, alluding to the full moon and her pregnant belly as well. And then in the right-hand image, we see a wee bit more of her narrative. So we see, again, she's sort of looking to the skies. We see a version of her in the background on the boat. And on the left of the paler image, we can see Kouros Abbey waiting. I don't think it was ever that close to the shore, nor was it on a cliff, but never mind. Yeah, it's a beautiful image. And I think that's Kouros Abbey calling her to safety. But just, yeah, beautiful images for Saint Thane. This is Traprain Law. So last summer, as part of my research process, I did as best as I could, not too literally, to follow in her footsteps. So I went to Traprain Law, which is, you know, it's a plateau, it's a big hump of a hill, not a huge climb, but great views when you get to the top with these amazing, I'm no geologist, but these amazing kind of striated rock formations and sort of steep cliffs all around. Wild horses on the top. Plenty of photos of these clogging up my hard drive. This was good, I thought. On the left, there's a quarry, disused quarry there. So there's one side that you mustn't go too close to. But I just thought, you know, given the history of the place, it was quite interesting to have that warning sign there, not to go any further. But you can see all around, I'm forgetting the directions now, but you can see in the direction of Aberlady Bay, which is where she went in, where she was put into the water. So the story goes, of course, she was flung off Traprain and then carried to the shore. Now we can see the distance between the foot of the hill and the shore. Round to the other side, you can see the hills of Fife as well. This is a bone of contention. This is the signage that's currently at Traprain Law. Yeah, and I've crossly added my thing at the top, no mention of Thane. This is what I sent to the performers. If you just have a look on the fourth paragraph there, it says a possible chapel, which may be linked to St Kentigern, that's Mungo. Legend has it that Kentigern was the grandson of King Lot, who gave the Lothians its name. And just curious that they would claim the grandson, but not the daughter. So very, very odd. I don't know if Kentigern was ever at Traprain. I've never heard of that. Given the story, given his mother's connection with the place, I can't imagine why he would go there, but I don't know. But certainly to just leapfrog Thane altogether, and you cannot claim the grandson if you're going to exile the daughter. So I've been in touch with East Lothian Council actually to see, been making a pest of myself, just to ask them if they're aware of this omission and when the signage is next due for upgrading, and could they change it. And yeah, so far they've been perfectly lovely and positive and said yes, they'll come up with a temporary measure until the signage is replaced. Yeah, this is the map of Traprain that you'll see at the hill. So you can see the quarry there on the left-hand side. So this book, when I first started my research, I wanted to see what else existed of Thane already in the cultural record. And this was really the only thing, one other novel as well, but this was the main one that I came across. And Nigel Tranter, obviously a well-known historical novelist based in Scotland. But this cover just cracked me up. This is the edition that I own. It's the first edition from 1993. I just couldn't go over the cover. You know, this very much from the Christian point of view. You see the sort of pagan heathens in the background with their spears, and Thane, this Christian innocent princess figure. Very, very swoony, you know, depiction. And I've just pulled out this interesting quote. It was good for research. I'll say that. I'll read this and then I'll say more about that. Loth was a big man, inclining now to stoutness, heavy of jowl but keen of eye, uncertain as to temper, sometimes amiable, sometimes irascible and harsh. Thanea was fond of her father, but had good reason to beware of his moods. They all had. She sometimes thought that Mordred had inherited their sire's less admirable side. Gawain his better nature, and herself his daughter, what of her? So, I mean, although Nigel Tranter was very much doubling down on the Christian narrative of Thanie's life, it was immensely useful for descriptions of the landscape, of the culture and life that may have been there at Traprain Law in the 6th century, because he did do his research, so that was all great. I was able to sort of comb through and take what was useful in terms of sort of getting a picture of the place. But yeah, very much telling the Christian story, which is that, well, it's true. It's not just the Christian story. It's true that she existed at this hinge time between pagan, pre-Christian beliefs and practices and Christianity. But the novel really leans into the idea that she and Mungo then travel around Scotland as missionaries, essentially converting people to the Christian faith. So that's what the bulk of the novel is about, and much less about, yeah, obviously much less about her as a person, which is what I was more interested in exploring. The next stop on her journey, if we can call it that, this is Aberlady Bay in East Lothian. So this was, when I got to Aberlady Bay, actually I didn't know this was here. This is a memorial stone to Nigel Tranter. So he'd lived in the area. This first line of text, Nigel Tranter, Scottish writer, who walked this coastline daily, writing as he went. So I can imagine him walking here and thinking of Thanie and writing Druid Sacrifice back in the 80s or 90s. And this is Aberlady Bay itself, just to prove that we do get sunny days in Scotland. Very lovely sandy beach. And I picked up a couple of shells from Aberlady Bay as well, just as sort of tokens for my research. And this information board all about the seabirds. I know Alex South, the composer, has made a lot of field recordings of seabirds from the area and woven them into the text. So we hear them in the score. Very important to telling her story, to again bring the landscape into the abbey, in actual fact, into the space where we're telling the story. And then this is Couros. This is Couros Abbey. So we're now over in Fife, across the Firth of Forth. And in the background, the current church, it's used as a church. It's Church of Scotland, but it's actually, interestingly, currently for sale. Church of Scotland have put it up for sale, and there's a community buyout campaign. So Couros Community Council are hoping that they'll be able to take ownership of the Abbey, which would be amazing to keep it in community use. So again, it's this kind of really interesting sort of pivotal time for the history of the Abbey and the community that it's in and the role of the community. So it's become this really interesting, important feature of the whole project, actually, to be able to support the community buyout campaign as much as I possibly can. But yeah, I just think it's lovely to see these two very different timelines right up against each other. Historic Environment Scotland are responsible for the care of the ruined Abbey, and as I say, Church of Scotland, but not for much longer, responsible for the Abbey itself. This is the new signage. So I was complaining before about the East Lothian Council signage at Traprain. This is Historic Environment Scotland's signage in the grounds of the ruined Abbey. And at the very start of my research, again, they had no mention of Thanie. It mentioned St. Serf, who had founded the very early Abbey there, 6th century. And it mentioned St. Mungo for being born there. But again, leapfrogging the Thanie of it all. And I very innocently, at the start of my research process, I contacted Historic Scotland because I was looking for, I was hoping that they would have all this information about her. And not only did they not have any information about her, because nobody really does, she was also absent from their own documentation of the site. So I just inquired about that very innocently, and they agreed it was an oversight and they were due to be updating their signage. So it was wonderful they were able to include her. You can just see here the section that says a miraculous mother. So she's now mentioned there. And bottom left, there's an image of her, which I'll show again in a moment as well. So this is Couros Abbey again on the left, just as you approach the entrance to the church, and then once you're inside. So we're making the performance site specifically for the Abbey. So we're using the aisle as the entrance. The three actors make a sort of procession entrance. We're using the transept to get some sort of horizontal movement. That's going to be the main performance space. And then they keep on walking down to the far end. I think it's called the chancel, where the altar is at the very far end. And that's where Alex will be, not at the altar, but to the side in the chancel. We're calling it the well. So we've kind of brought our own language into the space as we're shaping the show. One of the actors was desperate to go up and use the pulpit, but I drew a line. I said, no, that's too much. We can't use the pulpit. It just didn't feel right. But yeah, really using the space, making use of the obviously natural acoustics. These spaces are built for acoustics, and the natural light. You've got these gorgeous windows. So in July, we're going to, see what the light's doing, and we're going to work with the natural light as much as possible. And then the second performance, of course, not till September, but that'll be in Glasgow Cathedral, which will be much bigger, but a similar layout. Yeah. And just some more close-ups of the chancel end on the left. That's where we're calling the well. And looking back towards the door that you come in, and there's this amazing organ, which I think was funded originally by Andrew Carnegie. He's got big connections from Dunfermline, yeah, nearby. So lovely historic organ. So it's this amazing historic building with beautiful features. So we're really hoping it gets saved, Thany's at Glasgow, so we'll pause in a moment. But here on the left we have Glasgow Cathedral, and the lamp post you'll see in the foreground of that image, you can see the coat of arms, the fish that never swam, the bell that never rang, the tree that never grew, all of that. And on the right hand side, this is on High Street, which is, so the cathedral is at the top of High Street, and High Street is this really ancient road, really the heart of like medieval Glasgow, and eventually leads you down to the River Clyde. So we can imagine that there would have been all of these smaller waterways and tributaries running off the Clyde or running down to the Clyde, and they would have chosen a spot near a body of water to build the cathedral. And nearby, there's a couple of sites that are called Ladywell. So High Street has this power, running under the concrete. There's a lot of history that's been built over there, but High Street is a really significant place. And this mural of Mungo is on High Street, just very close to the cathedral, by this artist called Smug. It's a very kind of famous image at this point, so some folk might have seen it, but one of his emblems, of course, is the robin. His miracle story comes from bringing St. Serph's pet robin back to life, something like that. So a robin is one of the emblems of Mungo. And Thany has murals too. This is the St. Tenu mural by Mark Worst, which is the one I mentioned. It's used with permission in the Historic Scotland signage at Kouros. This is a lovely one as well because it's got these sort of star shapes on her shawl, honour the victims of this 1889 Templeton's carpet factory disaster. I think it was women who worked in the factory died. So it has a lovely sort of double meaning, double use in this depiction. And this one I love as well. This is Enoch and Mungo, also by Smug. So we see again the robin motif and the nimbus, it's almost a full moon or the nimbus, the sort of halo shape behind her head there. And this is on George Street. George Street joins onto High Street, so this is just around the corner from the cathedral. So really, supercharged part of Glasgow. If you know the city or if you're ever there, you can check these out.
Well, thanks very much for that.
Pleasure. Yeah, I'm glad to be able to share these gems that I've been collecting over the months.
So you've brought us another clip from a rehearsal of Maiden Mother Mage, your performance piece about Thany, the mother of St. Kentigern, for people who maybe haven't seen the first half. And so I'm going to let you introduce this, and this is from the Mother section. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, this is the second section, Mother. It's the first section of the text, so it's the first things that we hear Mother saying. And she's using a lot of alchemical language. She's just come out of the cauldron of the Firth to her sort of rebirth at Kouros.
By then, I was enchanted. Off the maps. A cup cast to the waters, estuaries of vessel and branch. I am the fish that swam. By then, I counted Fulmar, Kittiwake, Guillemot, Sparling, Bonny Horseman, Floundern. Found myself. Forgot myself. Found myself. Dissolve it. Recombine it. Solve et coagula. Forged and broken bones and sheets of rain and fresh and salted waves, my own ancestors. I ascended from the great glacial foundry of the Firth.
I really enjoy the energy coming from the three different actors. That's yeah, I really like that. This could have been, I think, a real, oh, I can imagine a different poet might have approached it as one person doing the whole thing, you know, one of those big long monologue theater pieces. I think this is so much more effective.
No, thank you. Yeah, the triple image is so strong. You know, Maiden Mother Mage, of course, we get from Maiden Mother Crone. We also have Father, Son, Holy Ghost. I mean, there's triple images across so many different cultures and mythologies. That was the most certain thing that I had in my mind from the start, that it would be three pieces that weave together. And then by the time we get to the final sort of closing section, it's the only time we see the three actors moving together and really acknowledging each other and actually speaking together. So it's almost like, well, not almost like, the point of it is that we've brought her together, that we've hopefully healed something and she's recovered. The maiden character has this line, "Put back pieces of myself collected from the heather." So that's kind of what we're doing. We're collecting her from these disparate places and putting her back together. So by the end of the show, that's where we're at. Yeah.
Well, I think that's, you know, an analogy for a lot of women's lives that we, and men's lives too, I'm sure. You know, you move from one phase to the other and you do compartmentalize it often.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about recognizing the unique strengths of those different parts of your life. And Thane, as we're presenting her, has this ability to recognize herself. You know, all three parts of herself are in the room in that moment, and she can actually almost speak to herself and recognize and what's changed and what the gifts and lessons have been.
If you enjoy my videos, you might like to join one of my online classes. I'm taking a break from teaching in July and August, but I'll soon be back with more classes. Registration with special early bird prices will be starting soon. Some classes have tiered pay-what-you-can pricing, and there are often scholarships available for the more expensive classes. To hear about these when they're announced, you can go to my website and subscribe to my newsletter, or follow me on my Patreon page. So one thing I haven't asked you is, how did you originally get interested in doing this? Why Thane?
Coming from Glasgow, yeah, I was aware of Mungo. I was aware of her as St. Enoch, but I was also aware there wasn't much said about her other than the bare bones of the story that we know. I just wanted to kind of write the record, really. Very powerful imagery in her story. So I first wrote the poem Thane, that I read earlier, to kind of reclaim some of that energy. So that poem is I had this image of a kind of punk princess, and I thought, oh, it's going to be really edgy and like reclaiming her agency and her power, and not being, you know, represented as this meek, mild, you know, innocent princess, you know. And then in the research process, the layers just kept coming away. Every time I thought I knew something, it flew off and there was something else underneath. And it was one of those that the more I worked, the less I knew. And then I found you, Chris, which helped a lot. And yeah, I just wanted to get to something that felt more authentic, that felt more healing for us all, you know, rather than in this constant tug of war, one side or the other. It can't be about that anymore. We've got to let go of that. That's not working. And it's about finding this other way, this middle way through, that we can actually move beyond unhelpful narratives. So I did have a bit of a mission. Yeah, I had a bit of a mission with this one.
I feel a little bit the same about the story, although from a different angle, because I've worked a lot with stories of Iarraidh na Fregad and his son Owain, the supposed rapist of Thane, or the supposed father of St. Kentigern, however you want to look at it. And I kind of look at it from the point of view of, they must have both been very young. The portrayal of it as the rape part as really a rape, as opposed to maybe, you know, two 15-year-olds or something just being very naive and stupid.
Mhm.
Her believing that, not really knowing much about sex supposedly, but wanting to be a virgin, him
Yeah.
supposedly in love with her and frustrated that, she's got other plans, which she's very much entitled to have. I'm not saying, oh, she should have just said, yes, I'll marry you and be a princess. But I just feel like there's more to the story that it's Hector Boyce, I think, in particular, is responsible. He's a Scottish historian. I'm sure you looked at what he had to say. Hector Boyce is responsible for a very one-sided way of looking at it, which I think has colored how it's been taught or understood in Scotland more so than the Lives of St. Kentigern texts, which also
Mhm.
discuss this.
Mhm.
And so I guess I have been the one who's tended to speak up for, maybe that's not exactly what happened. I know to a lot of women that sounds like I'm saying, oh, we should doubt people who say they've been raped. But Thanie doesn't say she's been raped, even as the
Mhm.
story is presented. This is something
Mhm.
that the church has decided, or
Mhm.
historians have decided.
It's so interesting because you and I, had a conversation about this a while ago, because I wasn't sure how to handle this. I was coming across the same sorts of uncertainties and how can we ever know? And it was really useful to have that conversation with you and here again, because I didn't know how to handle it in the text because everything was so uncertain, and to just pick a version, oh, it was Owen and it was rape and she didn't want to marry and all the rest of it. Just to pick another version would be to completely miss the point, because then I would just be piling on to a received narrative. But equally, to not mention it as assault of any kind would be avoidance, or worse, denial, which also I wouldn't want to participate in. So, how to handle it? I mean, first of all, historically, it's just so long ago. We're talking about something we can't be sure of. So maybe the more interesting thing is to talk about how women's stories are handled in the historical record, even ones from so long ago. And I think you were saying in an earlier chat that we just had, that in some historical records and in the Christian narrative, it's either virgin birth or rape, and there is no middle ground where it was consensual and she chose what she wanted. That's just not acceptable. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that we can't have a Christian saint who just chose to have sex out of wedlock for whatever reason. That's not a possibility. And of course, there was the people of Glasgow apparently in the early Middle Ages believed that it was a virgin birth. And this would be heresy according to the church. So this was very important to the authors of the Lives of St. Kentigern, the two hagiographies, that they found a way to, hammer home that this couldn't be possible. There must have been some way that she's impregnated, but she's not guilty.
Yeah, yeah,
One
yeah.
even
It's
suggests a kind of date rape, a kind of, oh, she must have been drugged or something like that.
yeah, which is awful. I mean, it's all awful, but yeah, this kind of it just further erodes consent to keep saying these versions. I made the decision that it couldn't be about that, and I've had long discussions about this with various people. It couldn't, the project couldn't be about that, because I'm not going to just pile on to this whole pile of unreliable and very slanted narratives. But neither did I want to completely gloss over it, because it's such a kind of known part of her story. So, it's in the synopsis. So the synopsis, which is in the performance program and it's going to be in the front of the book, the synopsis is doing a lot of heavy lifting. So people will, if they're not already familiar with her story, they're going to get familiar real quick. But then the text of the actual performance doesn't touch on it other than by allusion here and there, because what I wanted to give to Thanie was just something else, the possibility of something else. Maiden mentions very early on, she has a line that carries a lot of weight, which is that the identity of my defiler is unclear, seems strange to me. And then she goes on, maybe they had their own reasons to pick a story and ship it out and all this. But it's just to give her that moment to say, oh, I know what happened, because of course I would, because it happened to me. And we move on. And to not just have me put words in her mouth. So that one line carries a lot of weight. The actor does an amazing job of it. And Mother has another section where she talks about all the things that were stolen from her. Joy, chance, risk, recklessness itself. You know, the ability to be young and reckless and take risks, that was stolen from her, you know. So that's an allusion to trauma, really, you know, when you've had a violent thing happen. And Mage doesn't talk about it, really. She does, yeah, she's on with other things. She's up here somewhere. But it was a really interesting part of the process, how to handle that.
It's nice that she's not just defined by it, which is what so often happens. I saw a bit of that happening when the murals went up in Glasgow. I saw headlines like Scotland's first rape victim, and I thought, really?
Yeah. To turn it into a tagline, that's the thing that bothers me about it. You know, it's we could go back and forth forever on the whether or not it happened, and we still wouldn't know. But to turn it into a tagline and like that's the part that makes me most uncomfortable. She's still absolutely the patron saint of abused, exiled, and outcast people, and that's valuable. I'm not taking that away from anyone. I'm not touching that. That's not in question. You know, these figures have power for people for a reason, and that can't be taken away. But just how we handle it, you know, going forward, you know, how we talk about it going forward, I think is getting a wee bit more nuance now, which is really good. I was reading a novel recently by Sarah Sheridan. She's a Scottish novelist who writes a lot of historical fiction and has her own kind of ongoing campaign about writing historical female stories, women who have been written out of the historical record. But in her most recent novel, which isn't about Thanie, it's called The Secrets of Blythswood Square. It's set in Glasgow, but it mentions St Enoch's Well, as not in that time period, but as a place that once existed, and a place that the women of Glasgow used to go to. It was a Cluthy well, and they would tie offerings, and it was still known about. It was still in the kind of cultural memory of the city. The novel is set in the mid-19th century. But that was lovely to see, you know, that she's getting mentions and she's being remembered in these ways, because there's a lot of memory of her in Glasgow that just kind of again got paved over. I mean, she had St Theniuk's Kirk, there was Thanie's Gate, which is now at what is now Trongate, to the end of Argyle Street, and there would have been this big approach to St Theniuk's Kirk, which is now St Enoch's Square. And if you go to St Enoch's Square now, there's nothing of her, you know. It's a tube station, you know. Yeah, there's a lot of repair to be done. Yeah.
Yes, I think when I was researching her, and I found an old map of Glasgow, which still had like St. Tanu's Croft and St. Tanu's Well and the chapel where her bones were supposedly kept and all this, and it just made it so real. And also reading accounts of people using the Clutty Well, and apparently they used to nail like tin ex votos of body parts to a tree beside the well. So it's very much somewhere that they were going for healing. Oh, that was just really brought it to life for me. And and now we have a tube station in the St. Enoch Centre, a big glass and steel shopping mall in her memory.
I think we can do better than that. Yeah. Maybe now, you know, there will be a renewed campaign. Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. Another whole strand of the sort of detective work of this project was the possibility that the St. Enoch that we sort of receive from the Christian story was possibly, is the word syncretized, when it's basically mixed in with and made the same as a previous deity or spirit. So this idea that she received her holiness, or her holiness was kind of tagged onto a water spirit, a pre-Christian water spirit, you know, which it's the whole reason why we have wells and Cluthy wells and springs, why springs are so sacred spaces, and rivers and streams. Near me there's Dunino Den in Fife. Again, this overlapping, you know, whenever you go to use Dunino Den as an example, it's this sort of dell, very rocky, little burn going through it. It's a Cluthy well. on the top, on the rock, a church. So they would have, gone there and built churches there. So she could have actually been masking a much older water spirit, which is fascinating as well.
That we just don't understand the whole question of Loth of Lothian and all of this, exactly what those stories all mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And
how the myths changed. And it's such a frustrating story to try to research, because there's just so little there that, if you find a little, it's like forensic, isn't it? If you find a little fiber.
Yeah, it really was. It was Miss Marple over here, honestly. It was, I mean, you've done the work, it's such a fascinating process.
We've started with Fáinne Traprain Law in East Lothian, and for me, that's very tied up with the landscape and all my kind of research that I do. So what's your conception of her at this point in her life when she's just a young lassie?
In the text, I'm sort of picking her story up as she's quite freshly left. She does talk about her father. She relates him back to the landscape. She says, "My father, the mountain," and she uses very mountainous or craggy, jagged language to talk about him and how she perceives him and Traprain as being this hard place, this hard, impenetrable, craggy place.
Maybe we should get you to read a bit of the poem, and then we can get it that way.
Yes, I do have this. Yes, this very section. Yeah. So this is from Maiden. Botadini, O Ladonia, O Gododin, what befalls your brackish daughter? You didn't you? And didn't I fall down Heelster Gowdy to land there all miraculous? When all I'd been and hoped for, what was mine, was sold for parts, left to petrify on an old volcano. I have questions. Are all fathers mountains? Jagged hulks of immovable hardness, a treachery of stairways strung across sea air, calling us precipice to precipice.
Are all fathers mountains? That's such a encapsulating line for this story of the father who throws his daughter off his hill fort,
Yeah, she talks in heavy code a lot of the time, it's poetry, isn't it? So every line's carrying so much weight, and all the time just trying to get her head around, because we spend so much time thinking about what happened before, which is fair and right, but then also what we are quite willing to accept is the fact that her father, either himself or upon his orders, flung her off the hill, and that's the part that we kind of skip over quite quickly and are very happy to accept. She's wanting to talk about that bit a wee bit more. That's where more of her focus goes.
So Fáinne then ends up in Fife at Cúdaráis, rescued by these saintly monks, Saint Serph and friends. And this is probably the bit of her life I know the least about. So maybe I'll let you kind of take up the story a bit and read us a bit of the mother section, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I decided that the mother section would be the most kind of alchemical, bringing in strands of Arthurian as well, Arthurian legend and references. So she's a lot angrier than Maiden, as you could assume. She mentions Mungo because he's now in her life, but she doesn't mention him a lot. He's just kind of running around in the background, but we understand he's there. And she's just trying to make sense of what happened and also what her role is now. So she's trying to, redefine her identity sort of yet again, and also going over what happened. She has one line here: "I was the toll torn and pocketed against my will." She knows exactly what happened and why, although she's still trying to accept it. Like overbitten fruit, am I to mother everything, which is to live in constant oscillation, love and loss, blame and adoration, betony and bramble, and all of this without an oar? I, not I. I span ashore at Cúdaráis and unfurled like all the words for river, Avon, Affin, Avain, Amond, Allen, Awe. These I came to know and claimed my own. And where the estuary narrows at the Carse, the undrained moss all bulbous with worry, prayed over daily to save the land from an angry sea god or inconvenient tides. But what of my salinity? Somehow less concern now I was a culverted stream. I never salted the fields. I toiled with the bees, understood consinity, sweetness as a fair exchange, rode with Mungo in a sling, snug as an agate formed of a void in the rock.
I love that little riff off Aneurin there. I, not I. That's
And she's been quite sarcastic because they all have that. Maiden, Mother, and Mage all have a version of that, but Mother's is quite sarcastic. She's going, I, not I.
I guess that brings us toward Mage, and a part of her life we don't know much about. Like, what did she do when she was in Glasgow? How did she come to be there? Can you give us a taste of the final section, or do you want to introduce it with anything you found in your research?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'll introduce it a wee bit. Again, yeah, we only kind of know of the locations, you know, so the gate, the kirk, the chapel, yeah. And the fact that it's understood she did have a following of her own, so it wasn't just Mungo, but she had a following, a cult it was called, you know. All that's unbound is tied in offering at the well, given to the Gruagach of the gate, for whatever comes next. I am the tree that grew, the bell that rang. We were here all along. Now the sky is a city alerted by swallows as we flit between breeze blocks and spires in constant congregation, the rarity of landing. And I wonder if we've asked too much of roses, or too little of rivers that built the ships and named the streets and held our bodies time and time again.
I think that mixture of contemporary and ancient language and references to the old bardic tradition, I think they work together really, really well.
Thanks. I mean, I think it unlocks something really interesting, just putting these bits of imagery and language up against each other. They kind of spark off each other. I think it's really interesting.
So your involvement with this project has broadened out in all these directions, like getting the signage changed to places, and I just think that's fabulous. And you also have this project, I don't know if it's finished now or still going, with Kurdish Women's Group in Glasgow. And the art from that looked amazing. I think you have a slide of some of that.
Yeah, here we are. So this, yes, it has finished now because it's part of the overall project. So this has been called Thanie's Haven, Stories of Refuge and Recovery. And this was a series of workshops that were supported by Historic Environment Scotland. And they supported me in going into work with 3 different groups in all of Thanie's 3 locations. So it was, yes, a Kurdish refugee women's group in Glasgow, Ukrainian refugee women's group in Fife, and a youth group in East Lothian, where Thanie herself was a youth. That's where she grew up. And in with each of the groups, I was bringing, you probably recognise from the artwork here, Frances Law's outline, which we've been calling this Thanie-shaped space. Because very early on in the project, I realised I wasn't telling a story so much as just understanding this Thanie-shaped space and what do we fill it with. So we used Frances Law's outline, and I took that to the different groups, and they decorate a background for themselves, and the text, and this is from the Ukrainian group, so this is in Ukrainian, but they are writing about themselves. So as much as they want of their life story, obviously the Glasgow and Fife groups had immense stories of exile to talk about, and they were encouraged to talk about that as much or as little as they wanted, and in whatever way they wanted. And you can see they've filled the spaces just beautifully with what they wanted to say. And they're also going to be recording themselves reading these pieces, and Historic Scotland are going to be putting them up online. So you'll also be able to hear them in the participants' own voices and in the participants' own languages. So we've got different Kurdish dialects and we've got Ukrainian. And then the youth group writing in English. They're in East Lothian. So that was a group of girls, which was joyful. They were just an absolute joy. Everyone was, but they were just a joy to work with. For that youth group, we were talking much more about transition, and they were just about to go from primary into secondary. So, what do you imagine yourself in this period of transition? What do you imagine for yourself in the future? And this artwork, these pieces are going to be on display at all of the performances. So at Kouros Abbey and again at Glasgow Cathedral.
Just amazing. I just love them. I want to be able to pick them up off that table where you took that photo and look them over.
I remember the woman that the tree one that just on the left there. She did it ever so quickly, and she started painting. She's like, "Oh, I'm no good at painting. I'm no good at art." And then we just sort of all watched with like our mouths hanging open as she just went ahead and made this amazing, beautiful image that I could never have made. It's impossible to overstate how immense that is to have a group trust you so much and just be so giving of themselves. And you've only got a few sessions with them, you know, but they produce beautiful work. Yeah. But yeah, the show dates here, Kouros Abbey in July. Yeah, that date of 18th July, obviously I chose the dates on purpose to incorporate St. Tenu's feast day. So on the 18th, we're having an after show discussion. And on the 19th, which is the Saturday, there's a matinee, 2 p.m. and an evening show. And both of those Saturday shows are with BSL sign language interpretation by Lisa Lee, which is fantastic. So she's our 5th performer. And the September date for Glasgow Cathedral's there as well. And that's my website, so you can see more there.
So I think you've done a pretty good job there of reminding us of the dates and venues, but I will put it all in the show notes under the video as well. And if people want to find you online and maybe purchase some of your written work, what's the best way to do that?
Well, my last 2 collections that I read from, so that's Longfield Loop and Rough Currency, they're both published by Tapsultiri. So that's tapsultiri.co.uk, and you'll find both collections for sale there. And in fact, Longfield Loop will soon have an e-book and an audio book version, so even easier than getting the physical copy sent out to you. But you can, obviously, they do ship internationally. Or my website, rebeccajoysharp.com, links to various other projects that I've done where things are for sale, but Tapsultiri is your best bet for recent things. The Maiden Mother Mage book, that's going to be with Matechnik Press, which is best found through my website just now. And the book will be available from July onwards because it's going to be there at the shows.
Well, thanks again so much for talking to us, and I'll make sure that all the links and dates and everything are there for people to access. So it's been great. Thanks very much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. It's been just an absolute joy. We could be here for days talking about all of this.
Oh, yeah.
It's been wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for all your work on you know, Celtic poetry and Thane. And it's really how it really enriched my process of making this work. So yeah, I really appreciate your work as well, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you.